By now, most of you probably know the somewhat cheesy meme that originally emerged from the UK with the question, do you have a license for that? And some of you might know, especially if you live in the UK, that you actually need a license that you need to pay for in order to own and operate a television. It might be absurd to the people who do not dwell in this strange, misty island, but to them it's just business as usual. And so it is, as is often the case, that we now have an issue that's affecting women disproportionately, it seems, and therefore that issue is becoming a so-called feminist issue, or an issue that needs to be addressed and improved upon. Now, specifically, I'm talking about this idea that's being presented in several articles and links in the low bar regarding women being disproportionately affected by the prosecution of evading the TV license fee. And just to give you a sense of what's going on, I will read off a snippet. Campaigners have warned that current TV license laws are disproportionately affecting women, especially those living in poverty, and that decriminalization should be welcomed as a result. This is following the news that Boris Johnson's government will look at reviewing the licensing laws and decide whether those who do not pay the fee should still be prosecuted. Naima Sakande from the Center for Criminal Appeals tells The Independent the laws are a feminist issue because women are more likely to be living in poverty or impacted by austerity than men. They are more likely to be the member of the household who is present when licensing officers come to the property, so are more likely to face charges. Every year, prosecutions are brought against thousands of Britons who do not buy a license, but the number of those against women is much higher than men. In 2017, latest data available, 72% of all prosecutions for TV license fee evasion were against women. This figure is so high that license fee evasion accounted for 30% of all prosecutions in Britain against women, the single most common charge. In contrast, only 4% of prosecutions against men in Britain were for non-payment of the license. Sakande says that this is because many women are living in poverty and cannot afford to buy one. Quote, poverty is not a crime, and after years of tightened belts and austerity cuts, many are deciding the TV license fee is simply not an expense they can take on, end quote. So you get the gist. And I can assure you, though it's difficult to look into, that a lot of these numbers are cooked, or if they're not outrightly cooked, they are fiddled around with. So they bring up certain stats, but it's not exactly clear how they arrived at them. For example, they go throughout this article and the other article on about how women are more affected by poverty than men. But the question is, what do they mean by poverty? Low income? Are they receiving welfare checks? Are they receiving social aid? We simply don't know. But one thing that we do know across the board, virtually universally, in every country that we can think of, men make up the vast majority of homeless people. Now, I guess it comes down in this matter to the question of whether or not you consider homelessness a state of poverty. I guess not, because poverty might be defined as being poor as opposed to having nothing. But this is what I mean when I say that they're sort of cooking the numbers and fiddling around with things. It might be the case that women are slightly more represented in low-income households, but it's certainly not the case that they're a majority of people with nothing, i.e. homeless. And as is always the case, things are only addressed that are regarded as problematic when it affects women. So in this case, women are allegedly being disproportionately affected by TV licensing fees because, again, allegedly, they're more likely to be poor than men, and poverty is not a crime, and therefore there needs to be some kind of reform of this terrible policy. Now, from my own perspective, I think TV licenses are just plain silly and retarded, but that's how they do it there. But this reminds me actually of a story from a couple of years back that talked about alimony reform, specifically in Florida, and these days there actually is alimony reform. And let me just read a snippet to give you a sense of what that was about, because it ties in very neatly to this topic of TV licensing reform due to the poor women suffering. And this is from 2015. When alimony reform comes to Florida, it may be too late for Tari McMillan, a 65-year-old who runs a jewelry business near Tampa. McMillan was ordered to pay her ex-husband $7,000 a month 15 years ago. Even so, she has joined the crusade to lobby state legislators to change the legal obligation to pay financial support to a spouse before or after marital separation. Some states have already put curbs on judgments, particularly for marriages of less than 20 years. But most, like Florida, are still in progress or are constantly evolving. Quote, I thought I was my own island of misery, that I had to go through this. But once I got involved, I was very impressed. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, she said. And it's unfair for men to pay it, and unfair for women to pay it. But women are much more outraged by it, says Ken Newman, a founder of the Academy of Professional Family Mediators. And this is why I mentioned this. This is another great example of things only changing at the level of politics and social policy when women are allegedly disproportionately affected. Now, when it comes to alimony, women are still not disproportionately affected. But the very fact that some women, a very small percentage of women, were being affected by this, created the momentum for more women to get involved and to have the pushing power to push through the legislation, which I believe has reformed to some degree, all due to women being disproportionately affected. And a lot of this just comes down to a simple fact of reality that we all have to come to terms with, that women are much more sensitive about their relative discomfort compared to men. Now, we as men have evolved to just tough out situations and deal with a lot of BS, but it's quite the opposite for women. Women evolve, frankly speaking, to complain and to nag. It's an effective tactic used in relationships, and it's what gets things done. When women complain, men react, and they usually implement the things that women want when they complain. And this is true at the domestic level, in marriages and households, and true at the macro level, the level of government, whether it's local government, state government, or even the government of a country. Women are just much better at this, but they also have a lot more pushing power because they are women. Even if men were to get together to somehow try to fix something, it almost certainly would not happen. We've seen these few instances of fathers who band together to try to create some sort of organization to push back against fatherlessness and the fact that they can't see their children, and it almost always fails miserably. Nobody cares, nobody's paying attention. And this is just something that we need to live with. However, ultimately, whatever new policy is introduced, it will also apply to men, because they can't make a woman-only policy. Even though that's what they're really looking to do, they can't do that, not officially. That would go too far. So in the UK, presumably, men would benefit as well from the decriminalization of licensing fees, just like they would with regards to alimony reform in Florida. And there was a time long ago when I thought maybe men could band together to get things done, but time and again, by observation, it's become clear to anyone who's paying attention that that will never happen. What benefits men might reap from reforms or changes in the law, they will almost inevitably come because women have complained and wanted something new. And when women complain and want something, people listen. Above all, men listen, and they get it done for them. That's how it's been for decades, to say the very least. Anyway, gentlemen, I will catch you later if I'm still alive, and as always, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.